Hello, in this video I wanted to walk through and hopefully show some of the things that have made their way into the 1.0.0 version of Chocolatey CLI. So let's jump into the release notes. So the first thing to say is that this is the first major version of Chocolatey CLI. We at Chocolate are really happy to have finally gotten to this point. It allows us to start thinking about upstream changes that we want to make into Chocolate CLI. Some of those things that we're discussing and starting to roadmap about, they're breaking changes. So we wanted to get to a first major version of Chocolatey, draw the line in the sand, and be able to start making changes going forward. So with that in mind, this release does have a lot of breaking changes, but they're breaking changes that have been signaled either through documentation or through videos like this or through directly in the CLI output for quite a while now. But we're drawing the line in the sand saying that these are the things that we've changed, and then we can start building on that going forward. So the first thing I want to call out is that there's a warning there, is that if you are using a Chocolate license extension, if you install, or if you're going to install or upgrade version 1.0.0 of Chocolate CLI, you will first need to upgrade to version 4 of the Chocolate license extension. The reason for that is because obviously some of the changes, some of the things that we've removed in this Chocolate CLI release also need to be removed or modified in Chocolate license extension itself. And Chocolatey can enforce dependencies down the way, but it can't enforce dependencies up the way. Now, going into the next release, next couple of releases of Chocolatey, we are thinking about how we can improve that story to ensure that customers don't get into an incompatible state. But we're not there in this release. So just be careful of that and be mindful of those dependency changes. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that the breaking changes here is we've removed the deprecated Chocolatey commands and shims. So what this is referring to is, for the longest time, the Choco command that was the Choco update command, it essentially did a Choco upgrade under the hood. And that's because originally there was a Choco update command, and then the wording changed to be Choco upgrade. But now, physically, that command doesn't exist anymore, and any attempt to use it will fail. Okay, the reason is because in a future version of Chocolatey, what we're going to have is the Choco update command be very similar to, for example, brew update. We're actually updating what packages are available locally in the cache that Chocolatey EXE knows about. So we've physically removed the update command for now because the functionality of that command is going to change. So again, drawing the line in the sand, this is the current state, so we can build on it from there. The other one is the Choco version command. That historically had some meaning, and it would have done a different operation under the hood. But again, we physically removed it to ensure that there is understanding of exactly what there is. So there's the -- version to give you the version of Chocolatey itself, and then there's Choco outdated, which will list out all of the outdated packages on your machine. And that's part of what Choco version command was attempting to give for you, but physically those commands no longer exist. Those are commands that have been signaled as being deprecated for a long time now, but we've actually now taken the steps to do that. The other breaking changes here are removing of deprecated helper functions. So functions like file update log, write chocolate success, write chocolate failure, install chocolate desktop shortcut link. Those have been deprecated in documentation and in the source code for a long time now. But again, drawing the line in the sand, we're saying that those have now been physically removed. The CPAC alias. So previously, I could have walked up to Chocolatey and I could have done a CPAC, which would have been a shortcut for ChocoPack, right? What we found was that depending on your environment, if you had CMake installed, then there was then a conflict between the CMake that shipped with the CPAC EXE that shipped with CMake and the one that shipped as part of Chocolatey, and it all became dependent on the order that they appeared in the path, right? What we're doing within Chocolatey is we're kind of moving away from those aliases in favor of the ubiquitous Choco command. So going forward, things currently that are like CList, those are going to be deprecated, and you're starting to see some of that in the output that was there at the top. There's a warning right at the start to say that this CList function is not doing what it's going to be doing going forward. So we're starting to signal that a little bit more in terms of what things are going to change going forward. But all of the shortcuts, so C inst, C list, C uninst, all of those shortcuts are going to go away. If you rely on those, the recommendation would be for you to create your own PowerShell aliases to replace the ones that ship in the box. So that's the CPAC one, though, has gone away in this release. Remove the fallback of using old URL for Chocolate Community Repository. Historically, there was an old URL that was used, so when you did Choco Push by default, it would attempt to use the old one, and if it couldn't find that, it would defer to the new one. But again, that was just deprecated code that we don't need in the codebase going forward, so we removed it in this 1.0 release. Removal of the deprecated -t argument for the push command. Historically, the Choco Push command had a -t argument that you could pass in that said this is how long this command should run before it times out. That's been replaced by the higher level command execution timeout that is across all of the Chocolatey commands. So that -t argument had been deprecated for a long time. So again, drawing the line in the sand, it's now been removed. Ensure that Chocolatey correctly handles removed features when running Choco feature command. This is, strictly speaking, this is a breaking change in the sense that previously, in a previous version of Chocolatey, we removed a feature that was called check last script exit code. So we physically removed the feature so you couldn't enable or not. No, let me say that again. We physically removed the feature so that there was no code that ran using that feature. So if the fact that it was enabled or disabled made no difference to the actual execution of Chocolatey. But what we found was that you could still do Choco feature enable that feature name. Now that didn't make sense because, well, you're enabling and disabling a feature that has no bearing on the current Chocolatey installation. So what we did is we changed that to say, well, actually, we if the feature will not be allowed to be enabled or disabled if it doesn't exist in the current Chocolatey version is installed. So it's a breaking change in the sense that we've now stopped you being able to do something you were able to do before. Okay. And in terms of improvements, we've pulled in a new version of shimgen. So for those of you that know, if you install a Chocolatey package and there's an exe contained within it, then by automatically or by default, Chocolatey will create a shim, and that shim will already exist in the path. So it makes it really simple to execute that executable that's just been dropped without having to change the actual path variable. We pulled in a new version of shimgen. There's release notes for what's included in shimgen, but basically we've pulled up a new version to 1.0.0 of shimgen, and we've included it in this 1.0.0 release of Chocolatey itself. Uninstallation of Chocolatey, or installation of Chocolatey should add a more descriptive comment when adding tab completion to the module in your profile. So what that is, there was some feedback. So when you install Chocolatey, if it can, it will add an entry into your PowerShell profile that says add in or import this module so that you get things like tab completion. But it does it in a way where it just adds that thing into the PowerShell profile. It doesn't give any information about why it was added. So what we did was we changed the addition to the PowerShell profile to make it clear what this is, what it's doing, and why it's there. Because we got some feedback where people saw that there had been a change to their profile and they removed it because they didn't know what it was for. So that's what that was for. And then there was a series of documentation changes. So we documented the update deprecation notice for push command to mention that the default source will be removed in v2. So as we were going through the process of what is and isn't going to be included in 1.0 and what the breaking changes are, we realized that we had to add documentation for, well, these things, we plan on removing them, but we're not going to remove them in this 1.0 release, but we are going to remove them in the next 2.0 release. So we started the process of documenting all those things in the 1.0 release, so there'll be fewer surprises when the 2.0 release came around. So that's what we're doing here. For the Choco Push command, Choco Push will default to pushing to the Chocolate Community Repository. And that's fine, but we want to take steps where you have to be much more explicit about where you're pushing to. So when you do a Choco Push, you're going to have to do a -- source to include the Chocolatey community repository, because we won't push to there by default. But what you can do, or what you will be able to do, is set a default source in your configuration. So you can get the exact same functionality that you can get today, which is Choco Push defaulting to the community repository, but you will need to take that additional one-time step of doing a Choco config set of the default push URL to be Chocolatey community repository. So it's a slight modification, but it's to prevent situations where a package has been pushed to CCR when it wasn't meant to be. Okay, so that's what that is. We're going to mark the Chocolatey shims, or we updated documentation to mark that all of the Chocolatey shims, as I mentioned before, are going to go away in 2.0.0, and they're being marked as deprecated today. Okay. Mark get bin root Chocolatey helper as deprecated. So get bin root was a really poorly named commandlet. It should really have been get tools root, which is the top level location where tools are installed onto the file system by default. So the get bin root, we wanted to remove it in 1.0, but we hadn't actually previously deprecated it. So that's been marked as deprecated throughout, so that we can remove that in the next version, the next major version of Chocolatey. We added deprecation notice for all things that are set to change in 2.0. So there's lots of other little things in there. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the issue and walk through where the deprecation notices have been added, so that again there won't be a surprise coming down in the 2.0 timeline. Provide better clarity regarding the license terms for using Chocolatey and ShimGen. So we had some feedback from the community that it wasn't clear on what exactly the licensing of ShimGen was, and how that licensing had an impact if you were then using Chocolatey or you're forking Chocolatey to create your own version of it. The Apache license absolutely allows you to do that, but there is a additional license component which is ShimGen, which is not licensed under Apache, which you do need to get approval for usage of that. So we updated the credits and various other places to try and make it clearer that there was that additional license requirement for anyone forking and making use of Chocolatey. And then we documented the fact that the source switch doesn't do anything when running the choco list command. Yeah, so it was not clear if you were running choco list local only -- source, that the -- source command doesn't actually, the option doesn't actually do anything. So we added some documentation around that to try and make it clearer about what would happen. It would essentially be ignored when you did the choco list -- local only option. And then finally, we did an update warning that is shown regarding usage using a trial license of Chocolatey. Previous versions of Chocolatey, there was a message that said, if you're using Chocolatey license or you're using a trial, then you have to do this other stuff. That other stuff isn't true anymore because of changes to the Chocolatey's backend infrastructure, or more specifically the Chocolatey commercial background infrastructure. The need for doing that additional work is not there anymore. So anyone doing a trial can just do installation of the Chocolatey license components in the same way that anyone that is actually a licensed customer can do. So there's no differences anymore. So that part has changed, and we changed the wording in Chocolatey CLI to accurately reflect that. And that, as they say, is that. We didn't add too much new functionality into this release, mainly because this was about getting to a 1.0.0 stable point where all of the things that have been marked as deprecated are actually physically removed, and putting in place documentation for the next round of deprecations that will happen in the 2.0.0 release of Chocolatey. So that's it. Hopefully this has been useful, and hopefully you're as excited about the 1.0.0 release of Chocolatey CLI as I am. It's something that I've personally been advocating for a while now, and I'm really happy to get to this point where we can start iterating on the next and future versions of Chocolatey CLI. So thanks for listening. That's all I've got just now, so thank you very much.